it okay if I step away for just 1 second?
Absolutely, go ahead.
We're starting in 2 minutes. Hopefully Mike gets here in time, but yes.
Oh.
I don't see him yet.
Mimi, he's still saying it's not working. I don't know what to tell him at this point. He said he's going to switch his device.
Oh, I like the chandelier that's in your background, or that's your light.
Oh, thank you.
That's great.
My office.
Nice, nice, nice.
I don't know where she is.
I should get my cats.
This little one is 15 and a half years old, and she's always sleeping. And of course, when we're about to do this, she starts barking.
That's great. Oh, that's so cute.
I know, my 85-pounder is waiting outside the door for me. He's like,
Really?
why wouldn't you let me in? He's like, what's going on? Why are you having fun without me?
At home, you guys. So if you hear one yelling and screaming, that's what I have.
Folks, I'm going to have to start muting everyone now. Stand by. Hey, Michael, this is Mimi. We see you. And,
very good.
Yeah, and so I believe we should be ready to go. We're just waiting on Janine, who we have been expecting to join us late. And
Okay.
if you don't mind counting down, and then I will just bring everyone on screen.
Okay.
And I'll let you count down.
Okay. Let's try to, I was just struggling with getting a connection for some reason. Okay, so here we go. We'll do it on 3, 2, 1. So 3, 2. Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Finney, and this is called Housing Help for Renters and Homeowners. This is really like a 7 on your side deep dive into this whole issue. This is an extremely, extremely tough time for renters, and of course that means it is now an extremely tough time for landlords. So we figured that means it's a good time to have a discussion about this, see where we stand, see if we can help each other out at all, and just pass along a little bit of information. Now, we put together a panel. We have renters and an advocate. We have landlords and an advocate, and I'll introduce them as we go along. We will also be taking questions and talking about concerns of everyone who's now watching this feed. First, what I would like to do is set the stage on where we are today. It's official. The U.S. has had the worst economic plunge in recorded history, and that means back to 1947. And many of the experts are saying this is the worst economic plunge since the Great Depression. It actually beats that one out. So let's go through what we know and where we stand. So the latest numbers show that the economic output dropped just under 10%. Unemployment seems to be hovering at just over 10%. 200 McDonald's will close. 800 Dunkin' Donuts will close, and LinkedIn has announced some massive layoffs. More than half of American families say they have lost income. A third of American families say they have had their credit cards closed or their limits reduced. The Senate just went home. This was news that just broke today. The Senate went home without extending the $600 a week COVID-19 aid to the unemployed. I think what I was trying to do was establish that there's not going to be a cavalry. There's not going to be a bunch of money rolling in through a recovered economy, at least not right away. So we want to hear from tenants and landlords and what they're facing during this pandemic. Let's start with some tenants. I want to start with Paul, and I believe it says Datillo or Datillo. Which is right there, Paul?
Datillo.
Datillo. Okay, wonderful. Here, I'm going to get you up on my screen here. And who's there with you, Paul?
This is my husband, Frank.
Hey, Frank, thanks a lot for joining us. Paul, thank you for joining us. So where do you guys stand right now? I understand we were able to help you out, we being 7 on your side.
Absolutely. So Frank and I are both hairstylists in Burlingame, not too far from where we live in San Bruno. So obviously we've been incredibly affected by the shelter in place, not being able to gain access to our salons and work at all as independent contractors. And I reached out to our landlord when it first happened in March and told him about our situation. And honestly, it was very difficult. It wasn't really going anywhere for almost 4 months. With sending them bank statements, letters from our salons, and then reached out to you guys. And I just decided to reach out to the VP of operations at Aimco Properties myself.
So when you said it wasn't going well, they basically you were saying, I can't pay, and they were saying pay?
I did stop paying my rent because of the moratorium on evictions. And I felt like we had no income coming in, and I didn't know how long the shelter in place was going to last and how affected we would be. So I figured I'm going to wait. Yeah.
Oh, and how did 7 on your side help you out? Explain what occurred there.
Well, they sent me to accounts receivable, and that was kind of where I was left for 3 months dealing with them. And it really wasn't going very well at all. I really got nowhere. That's why I reached out to 7 on your side.
And then we were able, I've got a lot of notes here. I believe we were able to get you a couple of months rent taken care of. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So it definitely had a positive outcome. It was very stressful in the beginning, but Sandy McClure, the VP of operations at Aimco, reached out to me, and Aimco, as she informed me, has a Aimco Gives Back Foundation, and she was able to submit our information after you guys reached out as well, and they are covering our rent for 2 full months.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. That's good of them. Now, where does that leave you, though?
We've been back at work for 5 weeks now. I'm sure, as you know, San Mateo County just got put on the watch list, and we are closing on Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. So you guys are back closed again?
Yeah.
About to be.
So are you back to where you started? Are you a little ahead?
Yeah, we're definitely a little ahead. I'm the planner, so we're going to be okay. Aimco helping us definitely helps us get through this. But yeah, it's going to be a struggle for a while, I think. I have no idea what's going to happen with our industry in the next 6 months.
All right. Paul, I'm sorry, what did you say, Frank?
We have no idea when we're going to be able to go back to work. So.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. I can't imagine. So Paul and Frank, I'm going to have you hang around for just a moment. I believe we had another renter coming in, Janine Nelson. I don't believe she's joined us yet. Is that right? I don't hear a raising of a hand or somebody saying hello. So I'm going to assume that's the case right there. I want to move over to the landlords for a moment and talk to a landlord that's dealing with it from their point of view, which is Gustav Gonzalez. Have I pronounced your name correctly?
Gustavo, almost. You forgot
Gustavo.
the.
Pardon me. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for correcting me too. If are your renters, are they able to pay on time?
No, not all of them. I mean, similar to Frank and Paul, there's a few of my renters that work in the restaurant business, and they close the restaurants and they have no more money to pay rent. So I'm working with them. We're working together on it, and you know, I'm doing the best that I can. I'm not a big corporation. I'm a mom and pop, and the mortgage needs to get paid. The property taxes need to get paid. The insurance needs to get paid. The utilities need to get paid. So the good news is the majority of our tenants are paying, and so that's a helping. And those that can't, we're working through it, as best as we can. And that's all we can do is communicate and work together and come up with a plan. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, then rearrange the plan and keep working together. I mean, I would say 95% of my tenants are long-term tenants. They've been there for 10 years or more. They're like family. And so we have to work through this together. There's no other option.
Now, the moratorium doesn't apply to every company, every landlord. The landlord has to basically have a connection to federal money in there some way to do that kind of short form. Is that you? Do you have a loan that's tied to like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac? Do you take Section 8? Any of that? Does it apply to you?
So far, none of that has applied to me. I have to pay my mortgage at this point. And none of the lenders that I have on my loans have said, we could help you, if you need it. At this point, I have to pay that mortgage. Otherwise, my credit will go down the tubes and it's going to hit my personal credit. And then things will get more challenging, right? I mean, it's just like a big snowball effect.
Yeah. When you say you've been working with people, what does that mean? How have you been working with them?
So I basically, when they say, Gustavo, no tengo dinero para pagar la renta, which means I have no money to pay the rent, I understand. Yeah. And I say, okay, I get it. You know what? I get it. You have a home, to live in until I can't afford to cover the cost. But for now, let's just pray to God that we can all get through this together as best as we can. So, I have a few tenants that haven't paid for several months, and I'm working.
Could you fill that place? I mean, if they leave, is there anybody with money to take their place?
Oh, well, I live in San Jose. There's plenty of renters out there. I mean, that's not an issue. I don't want them to leave. I don't want to create homelessness out there. They're good people. They're hardworking individuals. They've always paid on time when the economy was good. We're all going through this together. We all have to come together and we all have to work together. I mean, to me, it's really simple. We're dealing with family lives, and if we can, I will, right? As long as I can continue to pay the mortgage, utilities, and everything else, I will do what I can.
Well, you're a good guy for saying that. I've got to tell you, because it's not people are goofing off. It's like the whole world changed. It just, the earth shifted. Let's bring Lupe. I don't want to even, I'm going to get your name wrong, I can tell. Lupe.
Go ahead and try. It's all good.
Okay. Ariola, do I have
pretty good? That's really good.
Oh, very good.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining us. Please say it correctly so that everybody knows.
It's Lupe Arreola.
Okay.
The rolling R thing. It's all good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us. Lupe is the executive director of Tenants Together. You must love hearing a landlord like him, don't you?
Well, we really, I appreciate hearing from Gustavo and, landlords who understand that this is an unprecedented time for both tenants, landlords, workers, teachers, everybody here that depends on our economy to earn wages, to pay their rent, to pay their mortgage. And that is understanding that this is a really difficult time for everybody and we're all trying to work together. This is definitely a time when public safety and well-being are key. When I appreciate Gustavo saying that the main key here is let's keep people housed in one way or another. And let's make sure to put their health and put the safety of all of our communities first, instead of thinking about who can fill this place and pay more.
Who are you hearing from you must be swamped with phone calls and emails.
We're always swamped with phone calls.
Yeah.
But I mean, and that's kind of part of the point is that tenants around the state were already feeling the pinch before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, even half of tenants in California were already paying over a third of their income in rent. About 25% of tenants in California were already paying over half of their income in rent. The majority of people around the country cannot afford a $400 emergency. So, the fact that we have been busy it's definitely not a surprise. I think what is surprise is definitely not a surprise, but what we're dealing with really is the level of panic in people's voices and the level of panic in tenants in California who are scared of being out in the streets and having to look for another home and having to be potentially unhoused during a time when a pandemic, the difference between being well and not well in this pandemic has everything to do with your ability to shelter in place and to have a place to shelter in.
Yeah, when I've heard of those stories where someone tests positive and they've just lost their home, it's like, now what? Where do you go?
Yeah.
What? I mean, that's just remarkable. Let's bring Tom Bannon into this conversation. Tom, I'm assuming I got your name right here.
You got it right. Yep,
We've
you got
spoke
it right.
a couple of times.
Yep.
I understand that the percent of tenants not making payments, and by the way, it's about the same for homeowners, is about a third. Is that what you're hearing from your memberships, Tom, as president of the California Apartment Association?
Yeah, we are at about a third of the renters are not able to make the payment, or they can make partial payments. A lot of what Gustavo said. Gustavo is one of our great members, and he's sort of following what we've recommended to our members. But yeah, you're at about a third either aren't making payments or are making less than what the rent is, and that's a problem. I think, as Gustavo mentioned, look, you still have the mortgage to pay, you got the insurance to pay, you got the property taxes to pay, and just like general society, you have some landlords who are financially in better position than others, and Gustavo once again is probably a good financial position. There are some landlords who, for a variety of reasons, are could be overextended and find themselves doing what they can do to hold on to their tenants. I will tell you, I don't think that the vast majority of landlords have any intentions of moving their tenants out. I just have not heard that they're working with them to try to do what they can.
Lupe, is that what you're hearing? Are they trying to work with them? What do you hear?
Well, I think there's a big difference, and I appreciate Tom saying that, we'll definitely be, we want to be able to pass on that assurance, to tenants all around the state, but, definitely when people get an eviction notice or even get a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit without any context, without saying like, hey, actually, I want to help you out. Not everybody can be as communicative, definitely as Gustavo, which I really appreciate, actually, just being able to tell your tenants, hey, we know we're working together. What we're seeing is a lot of people who are getting eviction notices for non-payment, and then are left to try to figure out, what can they do, especially they may not know that unlawful detainers might not be moving forward at this time. They may not, and it's really that fear that goes along with getting an eviction notice and not knowing where you're going to go, what you're going to do. I think there's a lot of, definitely, like I mentioned this to Tom in our last interview that we were together, that there are good landlords out there. Absolutely. And I commend them. I've had great landlords the entire time I lived in the Bay Area. And they've all been small landlords. And I think that's not a surprise. One of the main things is that, many times what we're seeing right now is definitely small, the large, especially the big landlords that are really taking advantage of this time to try to definitely, try to either maximize their profits because they have very little connection to the community, or they're part of an equity firm where, again, the considerations of whether people are housed or not are not as prevalent. And the other thing too is to keep in mind that even if you don't get an eviction notice yet, even if you're just not able to pay your rent, it's for right now, for people feeling like they might be evicted, that feels like a death sentence, to be honest. That feels like a potential death sentence, and that they may not be able, especially if they have pre-existing conditions, especially if they're elderly, especially if they're disabled, they may feel like, if they get an eviction notice, they may feel that they're going to be exposed potentially to COVID-19 and to the elements, and are going to be even more at risk than they are now. And so I think the question here is definitely, are some landlords definitely helping folks and being willing to negotiate and show that kindness? Absolutely. Who we hear from definitely are the many landlords who also are not choosing to go that route and are choosing to instead give people notice of eviction, continuously try to get them out verbally, not be able to go through the eviction process. And in some cases, we have seen this, we've seen illegal evictions where people are literally being locked out of their units. And so people need to know that they're not obligated to leave their homes until there's a writ from the court, till a judge has seen the case, until there's something from the court saying that you have to leave your home. And, we want to make sure that people know that, and that they have those rights, even during this pandemic.
There is like an alphabet soup of programs going on that are hard to keep track of, at least for me. So we have the federal eviction moratorium, which has expired. We had the California that expired, but then was reignited, and it now goes till October. Yet then on top of that, we have got, which by the way, it doesn't necessarily extend it. It allows local governments to extend it,
yes,
which complicates it even more.
Yes. Exactly.
Then on top of that, we have the judicial, I forget the guys who make the rules.
Judicial
Council. And they say, I guess at the current rules, you couldn't actually get somebody in court to do an eviction until February. Do I have that right?
Well,
we don't have the date yet, but yeah.
But around then.
But
it'll be a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think part of the issue here, Michael, is definitely that because there has not been any one unified response, at least for the state in California, we now are left with a hodgepodge of eviction moratoriums that don't all give the same kind of coverage to tenants. We're left with jurisdictions that have not been able to pass any moratoriums. And so, for us, it's really important that the Judicial Council, which is one of the only few things right now that is keeping the courts closed for unlawful detainers, for us, it's so important that the Judicial Council rule is able to continue. And definitely until there's a handle on COVID-19, until the state can have a coordinated response that is not going to leave any gaps in coverage, and until the legislature also passes the laws, and including AB 1436, which we're highly endorsing.
We'll get to that in just a moment. I want to get over to Tom for just a second. Tom, would it help your members if there was one rule that maybe they don't even like, but one rule across the state rather than this hodgepodge, and then like the judicial, I'm not even remembering the name, Lupe.
Judicial Council. Yeah.
Judicial Council. I mean, they're the ones that have basically set the rule.
Correct. Yeah, correct. I mean, I do think that there is value in coming up with some unified sort of effort on this because it is confusing for a number of landlords. You got to remember that over 50% of the rental housing stock in California is in the 1 to 4 units, and 90% of those owners are mom and pop owners. We hear a lot about the corporate folks owning single family homes. It's less than 5%. So we've got to deal with those smaller mom and pop owners who, Lupe, I would say that the vast majority of landlords try to help their tenants. And yes, there's a small minority. And, Gustavo and I would both agree, we would rather those people not be in the industry. But look, it is what it is. A standardized rule, I think, does make sense. It is important, but I also think it's important that we talk about, not having evictions for non-payment of rent. And we did a very lengthy recommendation to the Judicial Council that said, look, we accept that, but there are some times that you have to get a tenant out who's a real problem. It's not about non-payment of rent. We just wanted the Judicial Council to be open to hear those cases. I mean, we have cases where we have tenants have shot people. We've had tenants have threatening to behead landlords. I mean, it's extreme. So from our perspective, from the California Apartment Association, we're content with the Judicial Council, putting a stay on evictions for non-payment of rent. But where you have a problem tenant who's disturbing all the other tenants, you got to figure out a way to get them out. So
And
from that
Judicial
perspective,
Council,
yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. My Judicial Council actually does have one of the exceptions to the current emergency rule is evictions for safety and for health and safety reasons. And so definitely if there is somebody that where the proof is there, definitely that somebody is a safety issue, is a safety hazard to the building, in terms of the beheading comment, I would then that is that the exemption there for that reason.
But a threat, Lupe, you and I work together well at times, and we also are on different positions. But that particular provision the Judicial Council has not found anybody yet, even somebody who shot another tenant because it was a quote accident. They were discharging a weapon, and threats don't work. But anyway, that's not the big issue. The issue is we've got to figure out how do we keep tenants in place and how do we keep landlords in business. That's, I think, the bottom line for both of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me say, what's interesting? I'm here and I'm listening to landlords and tenants and activists and it seems like like just right over here, it's like there's big banks that maybe ought to be part of this conversation. There's government that ought to be part of this conversation, right?
Absolutely. I think Lupe and I would agree 100%. That one, if you want to talk about, not paying rent or delay rent, look, the bank has got to deal with the insurance company, it's got to deal with the property taxes. It would be much easier for everybody if the banks, the insurance companies, and local government said, you know what, you don't have to pay right now until you start getting your rent. From that perspective, that would ease a lot of the concern that landlords have. I assure you, there are a number of them not sleeping at night also.
Yeah,
so forbearance for the landlords.
Yes,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think that's where Tom and I were definitely. I think to restate what you said is that I think we would definitely agree that the banks bear a big responsibility, as well as the big corporations that have been making money off of housing as a commodity. They absolutely bear some responsibility. There were some recent surveys and polls that said that 75% of Californians and people in the U.S. 75% of people would, Californians actually support the cancellation of rent and mortgages during this time. And I know that people may say, oh, cancellation. So that just means is how can we make sure people stay housed during this time? How do we make sure that neither the small landlords, mom and pops, or the tenants go into debt during this time that they can't handle and they will be weighing them down for years to come? And also, how do we make corporations that have made billions off of this, including ones where I've seen many articles that state that equity companies and hedge funds have billions and hundreds of billions of dollars just waiting to scoop up properties. Why is that money not being used to help keep small landlords afloat? Instead of waiting until those properties go into foreclosure, they could scoop it up at less than market prices. Like, let's use that capital that's out there to actually keep these small landlords afloat instead of waiting until these properties are no longer under community control.
Let's bring Frank and Paul back into the conversation for a moment here. You guys are listening to all of this, and yet you're living it. Does it seem like you're part of that conversation, or is that just noise going on over to the side?
I mean, it's noise off to the side, but knowing if there was some sort of forbearance would make us as renters feel better, because we would feel like then they're not going to come to us asking for rent because of their obligations as well.
Do you guys think about that? I know you have a larger landlord, so it's easier to be, you know, less hands-on than if you live in somebody's unit in their backyard.
Yeah.
But do you think about that at all? That, you know, they're there, they've got their employees, their bills, they're there.
I think about it. Yeah, I absolutely think about it. It definitely crosses my mind. But I also think that less little guys, as you were mentioning earlier, so many people are profiting off of these rents, and it feels like we're at the bottom and with no help sometimes.
Well, you know, let me talk to our landlord here for a second about that.
So, you know, the truth is my average rents for a one bedroom are about $1,300, which is nowhere near the $2,600 that the Mercury News puts out every day, right? So I'm not collecting a ton of money.
Where are you? Daytona, Ohio? Where?
California, man, just right down the road here. But
You need to move to San Jose.
I'm teasing.
the truth is, you know, I've owned my buildings for a while, and my tenants have been there for a long time. I've seen the kids grow up and leave and go to college, and so I have a connection with my renters. I guess the things that really irk me the most as a landlord is when the city imposes all these new policies that make it harder for me to take care of my tenants in my building so they have a good place to live. And I guess this is a better question for Lupe. You know, why would a tenant organization make it harder for me to evict a drug dealer or somebody who's committing crimes? And my tenants are calling me complaining, hey, Gustavo, this is going on. What can you do? And I'm like, well, you need to testify, because otherwise I need proof to get them out. No, I don't want to do that, Gustavo. I'm afraid. And it just makes it real tough. And so those sort of policies drive me absolutely nuts, because I can't take care of my tenants or the building.
On the other hand, though, you know, you don't want discrimination to come about where you know, not you, but a bad guy just makes up stories about a tenant, right? Lupe, I assume you're going to...
I mean, and so Gustavo, like, I definitely thank you for your question. So, you know, in my 20 years, definitely, of doing this work, I can tell you that the majority of the people who I've seen evicted are not any of these, you know, are not the people that you're talking about. And also, in general, like, the fact that I've had to see 90-year-old people being evicted from a place they lived in for 40 years. So those are definitely the cases where, for me, I'm like, it's so important to keep fighting for those protections that will keep people in their homes. You know, and I know that, like, again, I know that that's going to be, you know, unfortunately, there's these cases where if there is violence, if there is, you know, any illegal use, those are individual cases that come up, but that actually does not like overtake the fact that millions of people are evicted every year without having done any of those things. And they're evicted because the prices around the area go up, and the landlord, not you in this case, and I appreciate your concern for your tenants, but the landlord feels, I can make more money with somebody else, even though these people have invested years and years and years into this community and have been good to us through the good and the bad. And I appreciate that you actually see your tenants as more than like, what can I get out of them? You see them as people. Like, I appreciate that, actually.
Let me bring Tom in here. What do you say to all of this, Tom?
Well, I mean, you know, Lupe, you know, we all feel for that 90-year-old tenant, and you know, we've been involved in a lot of situations where we've talked to landlords, explained to them this is not the right thing to do. We've worked to try to find assistance for that, you know, for that 90-year-old, because if it is about increasing the rent, we do what we can, and that's not a good picture. But one of the arguments that I would make is, no matter how big the landlord's heart is, that that social burden, which that person, that 90-year-old can't go out and get a new job, can't get additional resources, that shouldn't fall all on the landlord. I mean, there should be some additional resources out there from government to assist. I mean, should the landlord assist? Absolutely. Should they figure out a way to work? Absolutely. But in this 90-year-old case, this 90-year-old woman who you mentioned, entire society, I mean, government, nonprofits, we need to figure out a way so that the landlord doesn't take the full burden.
I'm
So,
going
I mean,
back. Thank you.
yeah.
Let me
think-
hop in here. Well, go ahead.
Okay, no, I
I'll let you
was just gonna say that, people like Frank and Paul, like those are definitely like, that's for people that 28 to 40. Sorry. Okay, the 28 to 40 million people that are at risk for eviction around this country, like that's a lot of them are Frank and Paul. They're people that are service workers, that are teachers, that are that have jobs that they've lost, that they used to pay their rent. There is no joy in not paying your rent. Many of the people that we've talked to, so many people at the top that we've talked to feel broken by this current situation because they're not able to pay for their basic needs. And that is it's a matter of pride. It's a matter of dignity, for so many people to be able to do that.
I had a guy say to me the other day that he said, when someone can't afford groceries, they go to the pantry, the food pantry. They don't just go to Safeway and say, give me free food. Does he have a point there that the landlord should not be carrying this, that either charities or government clearly someone, housing is a right, at least to me, it's a right. And so they have a right to housing, but who pays for it, I guess, is the conversation we're having. Do you agree with that, Lupe and Tom?
One of the things that we're definitely pushing for, in addition to, rental moratoriums or to rent moratoriums or eviction moratoriums, is definitely as well mortgage assistance and mortgage cancellation. Like we said, they're two sides of the same coin right now. The fact that somebody loses their job and cannot pay their rent has everything to do with with that landlord not being able to pay their mortgage. There's a economic chain that we've all created in this society,
right.
and it's been broken. There's a wrench that has in there.
Let's bring it over to Tom. I got to let Tom talk about that point.
Look, there is the cycle of responsibility in this entire thing where somebody pays the rent, the landlord pays the mortgage company pays the investors pay the pension funds. It is this tremendous circle. And when there is a glitch in that circle, there is a problem. And by the way, this pandemic wasn't anybody's fault. I mean, tenants that lost their jobs, wasn't their fault that they got laid off. I mean, Frank and Paul, they were doing probably great in their business. And then all of a sudden, boom, it happened. All I'm saying is that, the landlords are willing to assume some responsibility for this because they're part of the community. But you have to accept the fact that, going back to that 90-year-old, or even in Frank and Paul's position, wasn't their fault. You need assistance to help them so that they can help the landlord, so the landlord can pay the bank. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm bashing the banks completely. I do want them to be a little bit more receptive. But remember, the banks have got their own investors that have said, we're doing this and we're going to get this return. If we want to change the system, which is, what I think Lupe is sort of alluding to, not a problem, but we got to fix where we're at today first, because if not, you're going to have some wipeouts. And the people going to get wiped out mostly are the smaller landlords. And by the way, even the corporate landlords, the discussion, that, Frank and Paul had, I could tell you, that company has also investors and they expect a return. They also have employees. So look, this was a black swan that dropped on everybody. And I think what it says to us is our system needs some additional safeguards so that when this happens, we're somewhat ready. The state of California had what, $22 billion in reserves. We had a proposal to help, as landlord organization, we were going to forgive 20 to 30% of the rent for those people that were impacted. And we asked the state to fill the other 60 to 70%. And we got zero. And it's because there are other priorities. So I think to some degree, Lupe and I, Paul, Frank, Gustavo, we just got to come together and we got to push hard because it's about assistance. I mean, until we get through this thing.
Let me take a couple of questions here and throw them out to you that people are writing into 7 on Your Side right now. One is, can my landlord deny a lease renewal since I can't pay due to COVID? Can I renegotiate my rent? Where do you stand? All of a sudden your lease is up, but you're still in the middle of a crisis. I'll start with you, Lupe.
Thank you. So as of right now, there's a law in effect at the state levels, AB 1482, which does state that there are some just cause protections at the state level, as well as a rent cap. As well as a rent cap that also states that they cannot raise your rent over a certain amount. And so people can definitely, in terms of renewal of lease, you have that ability and that chance to renegotiate your lease at every lease renewal. But the ability to be able to stay in your home and only have to incur that increase based on the rent cap, that does come in after you live somewhere for a year. And so people should really be thinking about how much can they pay, try to renegotiate their lease if they want to, if they can, but definitely know that there are some safeguards at the state level as to how much your rent can be raised after a year that you've been living there.
Tom, let me bring you in. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. And Lupe is correct, by the way, 100%. What I would say, though, is that when a lease expires and there is no new lease, it automatically goes to a month-to-month tenancy. And so basically what I would suggest the tenant does is that they basically negotiate with their landlord for a new rent, either a new lease or just a new month-to-month tenancy, because they can negotiate now. Absolutely.
Where can a landlord apply for some assistance? Is there any available, Tom?
That's the problem. Even the PPP stuff, there was a specific prohibition against landlords, particularly small landlords, for getting any type of assistance. I mean, it's crazy.
They don't get any PPP at all.
Zero.
I haven't got anything.
Wow.
Zero. Actually, there is a specific prohibition about a small landlord doing that. You cannot do that.
And then, Lupe, this comes from Cheryl in Livermore. She says her landlord is retaliating against her for non-payment due to COVID, and they're retaliating by raising her rent. What should she do?
Well, currently there is, because we're in a state of emergency, the price gouging provisions of the civil code are in play, which means that no consumer services should be raised more than 10% during a state of emergency. So I would say definitely she should look to make sure that they're not raising her rent above what the rent cap states and above what the state of emergency states as well, which is, again, is no more than 10%. And additionally, she could go to our website, which is www.tenantstogether.org, to see if there's any specific moratoriums in her city or county that specifically state anything regarding specific rent increases, or if there is a rent control ordinance in her city.
You said you totally back AB 1436. What does it do? That's David Chu's legislation, or at least I know he's one of the co-signers. I think he wrote it.
Yes.
It gives you a 12-month grace period and then 15 months to pay back or something altogether.
12 months
is that right?
to pay back.
12 months to pay back.
So it does give you 12 months to pay back the rent as of April 1st, 2021. And it makes that rent unevictable. And which means that you can still try to recover that rent through other means, through other legal means, but that means that the person is able to stay in their home, which I think is one of the things that we've mostly that's been our main drive in our advocacy right now, is that how can we keep people in their homes while at the same time giving people the time to be able to pay back that debt if they have been impacted by COVID-19, if they've been COVID-19 related losses.
Tom, I'll come to you. Don't worry, but I got to go to Paul and Frank on this real quick. Have you even heard of AB 1436? I'm assuming not, right?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like inside baseball. It's just happening. It's quickly happening. It's up in Sacramento. Basically, what it does is it allows you to pause paying, and then once you start paying, you get 12 months to catch up on the months you were behind. Okay. I actually think it gets to 15 under certain circumstances, although she knows more about it than I do. And she
there
says
was an amendment that keeps it at 12.
Oh, okay. That's why. Okay. Keep it at 12. Would that help you too?
I think it's important, really quick, Tom, to point out that if that were to pass, a lot
Here,
of...
let me get to Frank and Paul real quick, and I'll be there right back to you, Tom. Frank and Paul, would that help you guys if you could delay what you have now and then try to pick it up and pay it off over a year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, our industry being hairstylists is so affected by this. 12 months would give us time to get through this, get back to work, build up our savings again, and get through it.
Also, being independent contractors, we not only have our apartment rent, but we got to pay our rent on our chairs as well. So we're hit double.
Are you guys still paying those rents too right now? Not now, are you?
We're expected to pay
still. We actually had to pay our rent at our salons while we were not able to access the salons. And we were told by, well, I don't want to speak for your salon owners, but we were told that the landlords that own the buildings in downtown Burlingame were not willing to really work with the business owners.
Right. Wow. Well, Tom, let's go. I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead. Excuse me.
We're stuck where we want to be able to have a place to go back to work too.
Yeah.
So we want to support our business, but we also got to keep a roof over our heads. It's just getting hit from every direction.
Boy, it sure is. It sure is. Tom, let's go back to AB 1436. It looks like it's going to pass. What do you guys say?
I think Gustavo, maybe Gustavo was an owner.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
If AB 1436 passes and a lot of tenants aren't paying their rent, you better believe the mom and pops are going to go into foreclosure because they still have to pay their mortgage, their property taxes, their insurance, their plumbers, their electricians, everybody to maintain that building. So what's going to happen is a lot of the inventory from folks like myself are going to move out of my hands into somebody else's, and it's probably going to cause more challenges for the renters. So I think that people really need to think about some of these bills and look at the long-term ramifications of taking out mom and pops like us, which is probably going to happen because we can't afford to continue to pay everything without rental income, right? Unless there's some other assistance from somewhere, which today there is zero. Just like Frank and Paul are getting zero assistance from their, rent of their chairs. It's no different for us.
Well, there's no help for you in AB 1436. Lupe, what say you?
Well, I think that it sounds that there has been some plans from, at the very least, from what I know, is that there was some movement at the state level. Governor Newsom, I know that I believe he negotiated some agreements for forbearance with some of the big banks. I know that didn't apply to everybody, but he did do that. I knew that in the CARES Act, I know that there was some provisions for help for landlords. And I think, like I said before, that the point here is that small landlords definitely, them losing their properties is not the goal here. Them losing the properties is not going to help anybody, and that it's going to just keep these properties out of community control. And so, which is why not just Tenants Together, but organizations all over the country have also been saying we need both rent and mortgage cancellation. We need both rent and mortgage assistance, because one where you need both in order to make sure, again, that that landlords like Gustavo, don't basically are able to also get the relief that they need to be able to keep their properties, while at the same time being able to pass on some of those benefits to their tenants as well.
Tom, I know that you've been telling from the very beginning, you were telling your landlords that they ought to be trying to work with people, try to get along, you're part of the system. What do you tell them about AB 1436?
Well, I mean, AB 1436 sounds great. And if we could attach some dollars to it so that, you go 12 months without getting the rent paid or the rent paybacks, and a number of our members would probably be quite content with that. The challenge today, though, is there's nothing in this. One, there's no guarantee of forbearance. I'm not sure the state of California has control over most banks. Governor Newsom, I would love to believe that, and Governor Newsom did a great job. He basically got a number of the larger banks to do forbearance. I think it was for 6 to 12 months. That's almost, that's approaching near the end. But state of California has no control over federal banks. They just don't. If they do, we'd be delighted. But we need some assistance. We need dollars that go either directly to the tenants to help pay the rent or to the landlords. There is just no other real way that I think you're going to fix this. And I go back to Frank and Paul. For them to be having to pay in their salon, they can't work. But it shows how difficult this is. And look, if the state of California could print money, we would be down there banging on the door, print money. The only people who can print money is at the federal level. And we need federal assistance, and we need some also state and local assistance. And by the way, you mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of dollars that are going to local governments. Some of those dollars, and a lot of it, ought to go to rental assistance so that people can stay in their units. And, what I would say is, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, Gustavo is one of my great members. We're at a point today where I would say that most landlords would probably take 70 to 80% of the rent that they're charging today just to keep their tenants in place, because nobody wants to lose a good tenant. They just don't. But we need something to cover a landlord could give up 20 to 30% of the rent, but they can't give up all of it. It's just not possible. Not possible.
I'm going to wrap up now. You guys have all just been wonderful. I want to talk to Frank and Paul to finish up here. After hearing the discussion, feel better, feel worse? But what are your final words?
Feel better. I understand everyone's point of view. This is obviously a lot bigger than us. I'm so happy with how our situation turned out with AIMCO and them helping us through their charitable foundation. But it didn't seem in the beginning like it was going anywhere, working with accounts receivable. I was trying to make the argument that I'm looking online and our unit rents have dropped like 12% here on the peninsula, and our same unit is renting out for $300 less. Can we renegotiate for the month of the shelter in place and it was a very fast, absolutely not in the beginning. And that was accounts receivable. It was, no, we're entitled to the full amount agreed in our lease and we have every right to pursue it. It was very discouraging. It didn't, and we have been good tenants. And again, Sandy at AIMCO, the vice president of operations, told us the only reason she agreed in the end to do this for us was because we have been such good tenants. She said, wow, if you had not been, we would not be doing this for you. And so I very much thank her for that. And I'm so glad that she stepped in and that you guys stepped in. But before that, it really seemed like nobody cared at all. It seemed like nothing was going to happen.
Well, I want to make 2 points. One is, you just helped a lot of people because you just told them that they better remember to always be a good tenant, because
Yeah,
at some point it may really come back to you. And so
Yep.
creating havoc doesn't do you any good, and it certainly doesn't do your neighbors any good. And the second thing you said, that you can see that it's bigger than you, and I disagree. This is you. This is about you.
Right.
And there's just a lot of yous out there. But
Yeah.
you're just as important as the biggest bank, the biggest landlord. And so you've just done a real community service by coming here. I really appreciate your time today.
We're happy to be here. Thank you
Yeah.
for having us.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
thank you. Let's go over to Lupe and finish up. What are your final words here?
Well, I think that I think the segment has made it abundantly clear. This is an all hands on deck moment. This is an unprecedented moment when every sector of our lives has been impacted by this pandemic. And, it's so important that we all basically need to figure out a way to where we don't have an ever worsening homelessness crisis, that we don't have an ever worsening joblessness crisis, that, we don't know if our economy is going to come back in the same way that it was before. We don't know how many jobs are going to be coming back or in what form. And so I do think that, to Tom's point before, that this is a moment where we kind of do really need to reconfigure kind of how we do things and kind of how we keep people housed, how we make sure that, tenants are able to stay in place and shelter in place while small landlords don't lose their properties. And I think we do need to see about where those resources are going. And we need to see about what is the best way that not just the banks, which I do feel bear responsibility, but the banks and the government and all these structures that have been making all these decisions, how can they make decisions that are going to be different, that are actually going to help keep people housed and people employed and small landlords in their homes.
Gustavo, we'll give you your final word here. What do you say?
What I say is, if Frank and Paul are great tenants, the landlords are going to take care of them as much as they can, right? And that's what I plan to do with all of my tenants that are great, which are the majority of them. And I guess to Lupe, this 90-year-old, getting kicked out of her unit, I think a lot of it has to do with education. And I think we need to spend more time educating the landlords, just like we do the tenants. So that way everybody understands what their roles and responsibilities are, and we make sure that nobody's doing anything that's harming anybody, right? Either way. So I think more education, more education, more education. That's what I'll lead with.
Tom, you were the last one I came to when we started. I guess you're the last one I'm coming to when we end. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the situation is difficult. I think what we should learn from this is that, we do reserves for a variety of different things. I think the state of California needs a huge housing trust fund, because realistically, that's what this is about. It's about the state of California and the federal government. This was nobody's fault. This was nobody's fault. And we're all being hit by it. And so, Lupe, we're going to work together more than we've ever worked after this time. And we're going to gang up on everybody to make sure that we can that we can somehow fix this and educate everybody. And Michael, thank you for inviting me to this panel today. And it's great talking with everybody.
As a proud Californian, it's nice to have conversations like this, and you see how thoughtful everyone is that we're talking to. Lupe, I got to tell you, you're looking like you're not necessarily feeling warm and fuzzy as we're on our way out of here.
No, because I think it's not that I'm not feeling warm and fuzzy. I think this is definitely, it's clear that there's a lot of interest. It's not tenants and landlords, we're not a binary. You're not just a bad tenant and a good landlord or vice versa. I think there's a lot of complexities around the way. But I think also, I think it's really important though to remember that, it's definitely not just about dollars and cents. It is about human lives right now. And so if that means, and to me, it's even more important, more than ever, to prioritize the safety of people, the people being able to stay in their homes, and to prioritize human dignity at this point. We don't know how long this is going to last. We need to be able to look out for each other. And at the same time, we also need to, make sure that we're fighting for each other in a way that actually gives us dignity and justice. And so I just, so it's not about feeling warm and fuzzy for me. It's definitely at the end of the day, making sure that people are not being illegally evicted. It's making sure that people are housed and making sure that people can live with dignity.
Tom, I gave her a second bite of the apple. I have to do the same for you then. Do you feel like you need to add anything to the conversation?
The only thing I would say is that I do think everybody should have dignity, and that's important for everybody, tenants and landlords alike. And Luke and I may have differences of opinions on how to achieve certain objectives, but I think our objectives are the same.
Great way to end it. Thank you all very much for your time. It was a real community service. Those of you who showed up, Gustavo, I appreciate it very much. Lupe, Tom, Paul, Frank, really, you've made a great conversation. This will go far beyond this. So I appreciate your time. And everyone that's watching us right now and gave us questions, I really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you.